Hello and welcome to my review of John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. First published in 1937, Of Mice and Men has been required reading in many schools for much of the last 80 years. The plot follows George and Lenny, two workers travelling in California in search of ranch work during the Great Depression. Lenny has an undiagnosed mental illness that has led to some trouble in their previous position, and he requires careful coaching from George to not draw unwanted attention. However, though they find work, it seems likely that they will not avoid trouble among the other workers, with Curly, the ranch owner's son, and his unnamed wife the most likely causes. Steinbeck's text is pretty short. My edition scrapes in at just over 100 pages, excluding the introduction from Elaine Steinbeck. But for all that, there's a great deal going on here. All the characters are explored to a degree, especially their motivations, or in some cases the loss of them. Character quirks like Curly's Vaseline-filled glove, Lenny's obsessive need to touch soft things, round out these people in a way that makes them seem very real. This sort of thing requires a deft touch from the author not to feel overdone. If everyone has a little quirk, for example, no matter how unique that quirk is, the net result is that all the characters feel the same, and their personality is lost to the authors. Here that's not really the case. We have a handful of characters, each gets a degree of insight, and they play off each other pretty well, as do the opposites, George and Lenny themselves. George is short and defined, Lenny large and shapeless, yet they have their companionship, which is markedly at odds with those around them, with various characters remarking on how unusual it is. However, it is Crooks's attitude that is most interesting. He is excluded from the other workers because he is black. He sees the value of companionship because he's denied it, forced as he is to stay apart from the others. Yet he recognises in it also a weakness, something he can use to taunt Lenny. I said, suppose George went into town tonight and you never heard of him no more. Crooks pressed forward some sort of private victory. Just suppose that, he repeated. This power play is one of the themes of the book, that powerlessness leads to wickedness. We see it in Crooks's battling of Lenny. We see it most explicitly through the behaviour of Curly's wife. She should, in theory, be in the same situation as George and Lenny. She is the only one with an obvious companion. Yet Curly's wife is not named in the book at all. Rather than a friend or a partner, her namelessness makes her the dominated subject, a part of Curly's identity rather than one of her own. Her position is the ultimate of powerlessness, and therefore her wickedness is that much greater. She shares the same weakness as most of the ranch's inhabitants. Loneliness. She gets very little genuine friendship from Curly, and seeks company even among the ranch's most vulnerable inhabitants, Crooks and then Lenny, the latter leading to the novel's tragic finale. The antidote the book offers to the pain of loneliness is the American dream, represented throughout by the reverent exchanges between George and Lenny. Repeated, these take on a mantra-like quality, a religious aspect that draws in the workers. Candy, reeling from the death of his dog, is hooked in, offering his life savings for a chance to join and mostly fund Lenny and George's Eden, that precious owned smallholding. Even Crooks, despite recognising the dream as just that, is hooked and asks to join them. Ownership of the small holding, the minor freedom to go to a carnival, a circus, or a ball game when they want, is the joy of freedom that even that modicum of power brings, a powerful image for the lost souls of the ranch. They come and they quit and go on, and every damn one of them's got a little piece of land in his head, and never a goddamn one of them gets it. Just like heaven, everybody wants a little piece of land. I read plenty of books out here. Nobody never gets to heaven, and nobody gets no land. Yet the depiction of the ranch is a corruption of that small holding. Here the men are reduced to the value of their hands. Significant then that both Candy and Curly end up short one, the hand also being a symbol of power. The hands of the ranch express the confusion at the companionship of Lenny and George. Friendship and humanity are lost in the quest for greater wealth. Larger ranches, larger companies in this period were gobbling up the local and family concerns. This is something that Heinlein, writing a few years after Steinbeck, was still railing about, having experienced it and the powerlessness it brings in his own family. Such is the alienation that this causes, that even Candy at the end of the book thinks that George is mourning the loss of his dream and not the loss of his friend. It's interesting then in that regard how similar Of Mice and Men is to the various Victorian social problem novels. The opening scene here is strikingly similar to Gaskell's Mary Barton, another novel where powerlessness is explored as a corrupting influence. Both scenes conversationally explore an Eden-like idyllic setting, beautiful ponds ringed with drooping trees. Both begin with men, hands in moments of respite. The men of the factories in Mary Barton are either granted a holiday or seized one by the right of nature, where George and Lenny decide to linger and delay their arrival at the ranch. Both novels will explore the damaging effects of powerlessness and the distortion of reasonable human relations wrought by the industrial reduction of humans to the value of their labour. The final line here displays how human relationships are lost, incomprehensible, in an era reduced to self-preservation at all costs. Carlson asks, "What the hell is eating those guys?" And Lenny's death mirrors Carlson's own killing of Candy's dog. Human value then is callously reduced to that of animals. A warning to America, then, not to follow the same path of heartless industrialization that Gaskell, Dickens and co. warned about some 100 years earlier, dehumanizing processes that lead to loneliness and powerlessness. Steinbeck doesn't just have an eye for character or a moral to push, though. He writes sparingly, but really effectively. The first scene paints a vivid image. A few miles south of Soledad, the Salinas River drops in close to the hillside bank and runs deep and green. The water is warm too, for it has slipped twinkling over the yellow sands in the sunlight before reaching the narrow pool. The scene goes on, but this opening is very effective. The picture it paints, like George and Lenny's, is perfect and dreamlike, yet the location is specific and grounding. It's too perfect to exist, but Steinbeck tells us here it is. I really like that combination. Then we see that the pool is a crossroads, with the workers coming here to relax, but also that despite their paradisiac setting, tramps congregate wearily here, and that the place is not unmarked by their comings and goings. There is an ash pile made by many fires. The limb is worn smooth by men who have sat on it. As with the scattering of the rabbits and herons that the arrival of George and Lenny causes, it's a foreshadowing of the fact that nature here is being corrupted by the work of humans. As book openings go, it's really effective, as is the tragic scene where Lenny kills Curly's wife. She struggled violently under his hands, her feet battered on the hay, and she writhed to be free. And she continued to struggle, and her eyes were wild with terror. He shook her then, and he was angry with her. "Don't you go yelling," he said, and he shook her, and her body flopped like a fish, and then she was still, for Lenny had broken her neck. He looked down at her, and carefully he removed his hand from over her mouth, and she lay still. Battered and writhed really speak of a growing panic, or is really great choices to make the struggle feel like one with real power in play. We know the strength of Lenny, so now we know also the strength of her desperation. And in this second part is this repeated use of "and" to begin the sentences that lends in not just a frenzy, but almost that broken record type of fixation that Lenny has in his panic. The way the last line here interrupts the run of ands, beginning with "for," is like a hard stop, I think. It hammers home both the brutality of the broken neck and its sudden end, as does the opening of the next paragraph here, interjecting this lengthy passage into two much short ones. It's an awkwardness that amplifies the eerie stillness that follows the frenzy of Curly's wife's death. As you can see from these other passages as well, Steinbeck really lingers on that death, amplifies not just the peace of the moment, but the unnaturalness of that peace. It's incredibly well done. If, like me, you were forced to read this as a child, you may have remembered it, like me, more from that unwillingness than for its quality as something less than what it actually is. Of Mice and Men is a great novel, a thoughtful and thought-provoking look at a time of transition from innocence, if you like, to the industrial, of a time when the American dream, racked by the Great Depression, was under threat of a permanent corruption. Americans can judge for themselves whether Steinbeck's warning was heeded or not, but if we all listen and take to heart Crookes' warning, the world might be a better place for it. The guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody. Don't make no difference who the guy is, long as he's with you. I tell you, a guy gets too lonely and he gets sick.